Hi, everybody. This is Adam, and we have B and Matthews in the house. Welcome to our podcast. And we kind of want to start off with the top 5 news stories that we want to discuss, right? So, for market news, there's a positive U.S. real yields add to toxic emerging market cocktail. So, improving U.S. returns may erode allure of riskier assets. All right, Matthias.
Not too optimistic because the future in the short term is pretty bleak when it comes to yields anyway. So, well, this week I'm half empty, so negative.
Negative in the emerging markets story or negative in investing in the US?
Investing in the US.
So, you would go for more emerging markets, or at least
Emerging
keep
markets,
looking for them?
Absolutely, because there's a little more, obviously there's a little more risk associated with them, so higher yield. So I think it would be better to look for more gains in those markets than in the US at the moment.
Okay. B?
I'll actually go against that. Actually, I think the U.S. is still king, with all of the things that are happening. I think this effect is happening not just the U.S. but everywhere, and I rather have my bets on the U.S. So I'm more pessimistic on that side.
Okay. All right. So next topic in economics news: Germany to borrow extra 40 billion euros to cushion war blows. Yeah, so the net new debt in 2022 is set to 140 billion euros this year for Germany alone. So so in the beginning of the year it was like 100 billion euros.
Well, I was just thinking, if you're invested in anything such as anything government subsidized in that country, I haven't really fully read into the German part, but say housing or consumer goods or infrastructure projects, then you're pretty set, it seems, because there's already a backup and there's no downside to investing in that area. So I think if you're an investor, I think you should be more than half full with this news. But at the same time, that is not a good look in the long term, because there's going to be a lot of interest payments that have to be made on that debt, and that could also eat away into future revenues.
For the German government?
For the German government, yeah.
Yeah.
So short term, half full, long term, I guess neutral is not an option. Long term, neutral. Short term, half full. Let me go with that.
The whole year has been for 140 billion. So essentially, like right now, the government's running a deficit. And Germany believes that this will basically help them be afloat in the short term. The ECB states Germany's interest rate is at negative 1.2. So if you're an institutional investor and getting that German debt, you're really not getting that much interest. And from the sake of the German government, like interest payments very low, compared to like if you go out, to Thailand and their interest payments is high because of, riskier assets and everything like that.
Right.
I may be wrong because last time I checked, it was like 8% or something like that for Thailand. But B, do you want to?
Yeah. So it looks like I have an article that I posted in the chat from Bloomberg. I'm assuming, is that the article you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting because I really think excuse me, that this will be just like a little bump, not really like, I'll be really optimistic about this. It's not going to be a short-term thing. I think they'll be okay to kind of mitigate this debt. We'll be fine. I think the concerning from the article is that they're going to increase $100 million to spend for military spending, and potentially 2% of that will go to NATO. So that's a really eye-opening statement from the Germany government, because they are, as you say, I'm not going to put them in their words, but seems like they might be prepping for a potential war in the future, just to prep to or to prepare for. So it's very interesting because that's kind of was kind of the 140 billion dollars was kind of, hey, we're going to spend that, but then at the end they kind of push on the side, we're going to spend another 100 billion for this. So that's, I feel like
And
that's not a big issue because 100 billion for military spending. Now potentially that'll be 240 billion, right? In debt, which is a little bit more difference.
and this was a good time to promote this book. It's Modern Money Theory, and it's by Randall Ray, and it talks about how the concept of monetary policy has kind of been slightly outdated, and now a lot of the economists nowadays they've understood that there is a new phenomenon that a lot of investors are taking in, and it's the notion of the ability of the government to collect taxes. Hence, why a lot of government debts are risk-free is because government's constantly collecting debt. So it's a good book. We're not getting any money from that promotion, but maybe next time. But Matthews, you want to say something?
I was just gonna say this is great news. If there's $100 billion in new allocation to defense, like for defense budget, for say engineering firms, European engineering firms, and American ones. I mean the Boeings and the Raytheons of the world, the Northrop Grumman's of the world. So if you're invested in those, you couldn't be happier.
All right.
I'm not saying
Hey.
anything. I'm not saying anything.
Do you want
And
to
with this-
disclose your position there?
Uh-oh.
No.
Yeah.
Well, it looks
But,
like the GDP for Germany is what, 3 trillion. So that's like pocket change. It's not going to do much.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
fine.
And stuff like that gets in this little book here as well too. All right. So next topic: the Dow closes down 981 points Friday, book's worst day since October 2020. And then in our little chat, B sent this one. You wanna start?
Yeah. So for this one, I'm very, I am pessimistic about the markets, but I feel like it's the flow where we have to do a lot of correction, and this is the time for correction. And to kind of stop the spending, we'll have to increase the points, and they're potentially going to increase 50 base points additionally, and that's a lot. That's going to raise the rates from 5% to 5.5, and that's pretty big in that short amount of time frame. And that's the reason why the markets were kind of were shocked, and that's why you saw a lot of selling outs, and that's why the Dow went down by 900 points. And from other reports saying that there's going to be a recession coming through, probably from, what was it, JP Morgan had a statistic saying in 6 months they have a 70% chance of recession, and then in the span of, I believe, 24 months, then there will be a third of a chance. And all those news articles kind of coming through is good to be sane, to kind of ignore them. But then as you see the markets moving like this, you'll be more pessimistic about how the market's going to be. And I feel like that's how the markets moved that way this whole week. So, yeah.
I have the number from JP Morgan. They reported on their earnings call the other day, maybe it's a couple of days ago. If I may pull that up, it says JP Morgan reported that their credit card spending rose by 29% and credit card loans by 15%. Mortgage origination dropped by 37%. Auto loan origination dropped by 25%. But they're also saying at the same time, deposits for consumers and small businesses continue to increase by 15%. That kind of report doesn't make you guys feel half full or half empty.
Uh, so I'm gonna take the moderator hat off, right? I'm gonna
Yeah.
express my opinion,
Yes.
and like I like. So I'm not gonna say I like those numbers, but I like what you presented, um, because like right now, the thing that popped in my head, right, is that I wonder if small businesses are actually, like doubling the price that they should have. You know, like you know how like input goods are definitely the cost of them are increasing, right? But I wonder if they're basically tacking an additional cost burden to the consumer. And in the top of my head, I'm just like thinking like if they do that, then obviously that would explain the number, but that's all speculation indeed. But um, I don't know. It's just it's one of those things where you just got to be cognizant of the price. And like
Yeah, and on the also interesting part is the credit card spending, the increase of 20%. Is that it'll be intriguing to see how much of that pertains to small business, as Adam said. Are they covering themselves using credit cards? Because that would be a very bad thing to do. Because right now they're trying to get a loan from somewhere, and right now in the markets it's kind of hard to get a loan. So are they spending that way? Be interesting because right now costs are pretty up right now, and depending on how small businesses kind of take care of those costs, it could be one of the reasons why you see those numbers. So it'd be good to kind of diagnose and
and
see where it comes from.
and in regards to interday lending, that's basically what banks would utilize to uh, like get the available cash to provide those loans. And what one of the things that people should look out for is the repo rate market. If the if this rate spikes, that means that um, there's a higher demand of cash, like short-term cash, that is not being kept between the banks. So to tack on to in terms of getting a harder loan, that's also a causality that you got to look out for. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. It seems like this news is there is a range of small businesses. Obviously, there's like a 5 people employer to 500 people employer, right? And which ones are actually the ones making deposits, and which ones is the cost a lot higher compared to their income. So it depends on the on which part of the spectrum they lay, it seems, and then how soon they may fold, as soon as the borrowing cost goes up for them. Like how soon are they going to declare bankruptcy?
Yeah.
And then what's
And
the ripple effect?
yeah, and that's the hard thing too, is that there's
Mhm.
also latency. Um, by legality, they have like, you know, those 30, 60, 90 days of
Mhm.
latency. And oftentimes, you know, bankruptcy lawyers extends those circumstances, and hence why you don't get an immediate reaction when, you know, all of a sudden the default rate is now like, you know, 10%. I was like, why is the market not going down? Well, you know, like we're still arbitraging between, you know, like two parties to see what can, you know, settle in the cash from another person. But moving forward, putting back the moderator on, and going based on the list that you guys sent me, I found this one article that's strictly what was requested. It's from Barron's. Surging fertilizer costs are pushing food prices higher. So fertilizers costs have roughly doubled from a year ago as the war of Ukraine disrupts the flow of supplies from Russia, the world's largest exporters of the commodity that has contributed to higher global prices for food, especially corn. Now, before we go first, um, during the week, I was reading articles about how emerging markets, you know, tying this to the first topic, um, such as countries in West Africa as well as Thailand, they're having struggle trying to get supplies for fertilizers, and I'm just going to add a little nuance to that. So, all right, guys, go ahead.
Yeah, this I can start this one out. This one it's very interesting because Russia owns a lot of the markets for natural gas. Natural gas that breaks down to the main ingredients for fertilizer: nitrogen, nitrates, phosphates, and sulfates. Then that's the reason why this. That's why this the reason that the food supply markets are very kind of shocking. Because right now, the countries that can afford it, they're hoarding a lot of these supplies. So it's interesting to see, how, for example, countries that can afford that how can they get these materials, and then because the way spring is coming up and the prices of fertilizer is going to increase, how's that going to affect the farmers and the yields this year, and that'll kind of pertain to the Ukraine situation. So if that situation does reside, then I'll be more pessimistic about the food supply chain right now. But right now, still very, very pessimistic, not optimistic at all at the moment until the war is gone. So
I agree. I'm very pessimistic, half empty on this one, because I mean it all comes down to input costs, right? Input costs, lower supply, higher prices for them, and the higher the input, the higher the price for input costs, the higher the price for end product. So what we're gonna have is expensive food in the end, and then until the next farming season maybe breaks the fever for the next year or for the foreseeable future, the price would be expected to go up, unfortunately, because it's just a matter of supply and demand. And it sucks to say that, but it is a fact, and that will hit the people on the lower economic end harder, obviously, and that's not good for other industries either, because that means less spending money for other things that could be purchased. It could be entertainment. It could be, I don't know, clothing. I don't know,
So,
anything.
so
one interesting. Oh, go
I'm,
ahead.
Good.
I'm gonna take my moderator off,
Yeah.
my moderator hat off again,
Mhm.
and I'm actually gonna go half optimistic
My
because
bad.
hold on. So I was reading a couple of articles earlier, and the the situation helped force a lot of the governments in emerging markets to essentially see that they need to do this on their own. They can't, like, the fact that 30% of fertilizers are coming from Ukraine. I think that was from either Nigeria or a country in West Africa. They realize that that's not sustainable, and so they're pushing for more of a internal uh, industry push for buy local. And it's kind of I don't want to say funny, but like the US has been, like, advocating buy local, buy local, buy local, and seeing it, like, have that message in another side of the world is kind of pretty cool to think about it. And like having that push kind of makes things a little more sustainable for the future. So, and I think, like, one of the countries in West Africa,
Yeah.
they were very good in terms of their production, and so government subsidies were essentially being used. So a lot of the ISI methodology
Mhm.
for economic growth is being used right now for that industry itself. So that's the reason why I'm half optimistic, is because, like, yeah, it sucks now, but not now that the culture of not being, you know, uh, contingent on another country's grain supply is now on the table. Whereas, like, before, it's like, oh yeah, like, they can make it cheaper, makes it expensive now. Don't worry about it. But now it's like, oh well, all right, let's see if we can do it.
Uh,
Yeah, you make a good point. That's the reason
yeah.
why, like, the US should kind of find their own ways to make these fertilizers than rather just consuming it from the old-fashioned way. You know,
Mhm.
use different kind of technologies that they can use these days. Because right now, the technology right now for fertilizer it's so archaic. It needs to be updated. for sure.
In terms of the global supply chain, I think that's our issue of the week today, that we could discuss about. Okay, so the point of conversation that was transitioned was the grain supply, right? And where do you guys want to start from here?
We can go to the part where Matthews is disagreeing with me. That'd be interesting. Yeah.
No, I think the whole self-sufficiency concept is great, but like producing your own food for your own population is great, but some countries just can't. I mean, India has too many people to produce food for them, and they rely on imports. And I was just reading an article how Indonesia's ban on palm oil is causing massive run on cooking oil overall in that country and India. And Indonesia wanted to save it for itself because they're having weather issues and higher demand than they anticipated. So they wanted to make sure they had it for their population. But India relies on Indonesia's import. So that kind of friction is not
that's
not good in
different
the long
though.
run. And for us, how does that impact us? It doesn't really impact the US as much, but it impacts, say, apparently from what I read, it impacts mayonnaise. I'm not a huge mayonnaise guy, but it increases the price for mayonnaise. Salad dressing, I care about that more. So that's supposed to increase as well in prices over here, just because Indonesia did that. So overall, the whole hoarding the food supply for your own local population over the long term is not good for
That's
everybody.
different though. That's different from the initial point where you disagreed. Is the fact that with ISI is you are producing your own good to help sustain your economy first and then eventually grow to exporting out. Whereas this one is saying the existing global supply chain, because of the shortage, we're going to hoard it due to the fact that we can't support our own. You see the difference, right? Because like what one's saying we're going to start producing for ourselves, and then the other one saying, okay, whatever we're doing now, we're going to halt because we don't have enough, right? Because those are two
True.
separate subjects, right? So, but no, this is a good article.
Yeah.
Basically, the article states of what he just said, and it's a real issue. A lot of a person that I had meeting today, she was mentioning that like getting supply for just an NGO, she has to talk to like 5 different companies to fulfill one operation, and that's insane. Yeah, but
Insane. I mean, your makeup costs, if you care about makeup, the makeup industry, a lot of the palm oil goods goes into it as well. I did not know. I just found out. So it was just interesting how just one minor looking action overseas can cause like ripple effects even here in unimagined ways. And it's interesting. It was interesting to me anyway. Go ahead.
And about like hoarding, not really hoarding, but then having supply in the global aspect. China has around like a year of supply of food, and US has like 2/3 of a year of food. So if the supply chain does go all wary, then there will be countries like us in China that can kind of monetize those as well. So I do understand your point, Matthews, saying smaller countries, emerging countries, they don't have the resources, and that is true. So that's a thing. But then on Adam's point, if they can do and they can serve themselves on the local level, potentially it can kind of help the global level as well, smallly, but it won't of course won't help systematically, but it'll go a long ways for sure.
Yeah, relieve the demand per se.
Yeah.
Right. So so in regards to the global supply shortage, I mean, just add more nuance to the conversation, is that shipping cost. So the same person that I talked to today, she mentioned that because there's a lack of shipping container movements, it takes 6 months just for something to be delivered. But if the like an organization needs to be now, they needs to be airdropped in. So you guys know that during the pandemic, because there was such a lack of demand, a lot of the shipping companies, they basically regurgitate a lot of their um their ships to break it down into steel and all these like basic elements, and it was way more profitable than just keeping them up front in their inventory. So there's a lot of cash from producing those basic needs. Now there's this demand that kind of all of a sudden triggered by those businesses, as in like it's forced to basically to worsen for everybody else, but they can profit a little bit more because they basically shoot themselves in the knee. Like not like they're getting rid of their boats for fast cash, and then all of a sudden, like, okay, well, the economy's gonna be back up. We need more boats. What'd you guys do with the boats? Oh, we got rid of it. All right, well, we only have these boats, so I'm gonna charge you, like 20% more. Sorry, we don't have any. We're gonna use the money to build more boats.
Um,
I just find that one a little bit interesting.
I think the whole global supply chain is in trouble, as discovered during the pandemic, because just a minor supplier in China shuts down a lot of things here, just because the just-in-time approach companies have been using since the late 80s to outsource as much of their production as possible has impacted what is made here, unfortunately. So the whole pandemic has exposed how vulnerable the whole supply chain is. And the new Business Roundtable ESG goals that have been set up recently has also committed to reducing carbon emissions and things like that, even if the company is not in, say, oil or anything, just in their supply chain. There's likely going to be a lot of onshoring, or at least bringing items to nearby countries, say Mexico or some in Latin America, to produce there and ship it over here, and not just cutting down the shipping cost in that area. So I think long term, this is good news because that means more onshoring and more jobs. So it is great. Full, I know. But short term is going to be pretty
bad.
Yeah, very painful across the board, and regardless of your industry. And that's all I'm going to say. So half full, I guess.
So
No, don't change your answer. Don't change your answer.
Yeah.
This is more of like a perspective bringer, right? It's not about who won the argument. It's about you take what we say and you think it over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you think they're creating this bottleneck on purpose to kind of inflate the prices, right?
God, yeah.
Right. That's why that's what a lot of people are saying as well. And seems like there's also a shortage in containers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this as well. And also everybody knows there's no workers. There's no and there's no semi-truck workers. They're not getting their 100K salaries as promised. And it is.
Oh man,
it's really a big issue.
They're
not getting kind of worm. I would like to open that kind of worm.
They're not getting paid. I heard they're not getting paid on articles I'm reading, so that's why they're kind of leaving that industry as well. But it's very interesting.
I mean,
with that whole 100K thing, right? It's because trucking companies like charges rental rates for the truck, and because they couldn't like handle their logistics, that it's basically them sitting like 16-24 hours at a station. Wow. Because they can't be like, hey, you're good to go, or hey, this is your next step, like. And
Wow.
then they're just like, oh well, are we gonna get paid for this time? And they're like, no. I'm like, what the
Yeah.
fuck?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's quite messed up.
Yeah. Anyways, go ahead,
Um,
Matthews.
no, I wasn't gonna say anything. Long term, the whole supply chain thing has exposed the unsustainability of global just-in-time approach that businesses have been using for over 3 decades. So now that we know the impact of that and how vulnerable it is, um, possibly with some incentives from the government, companies can readjust their onshoring or bringing it at least closer to the border, their whole supply chain. And that is good for us, I think. And I still remain half full. And about the trucking thing, I think there's just a whole trucker shortage across the globe. If you look at what happened in the UK, in Western Europe, and even here. So it's not a domestic phenomenon. It's you can say it's a global phenomenon, and their whole business model is actually a lot more different than other jobs, because some people technically own the trucks they work with, and they pay down as they work year by year, and then eventually own it. But some don't get that because it is almost predatory how that is arranged.
Yeah, very
And
predatory.
yeah, so it's understandable that we had a trucker shortage, supply delay. Your Amazon is not getting delivered on time.
That's a separate can of worm. That's a very separate can of worm. Amazon has its own logistical
I know,
network.
or FedEx, whatever. So
Yeah.
and it's definitely understandable from a human level, but there's always solution to it. But the problem is, who's gonna reduce their incentive from changing the business model the way it currently is? And I don't know who's gonna budge first. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Going back to the supply chain
Yeah.
shortage issue, I watched a podcast a couple months ago and had one. And he was like a SME about it. He has his own company that he created a startup for to kind of help with the supply chain issues way before this issue ever happened. And he mentioned that it's all because of the way the California ports are. They're so archaic. They're not like China where it's like 21st century. That's like re-innovative. Their levels because it's owned by the city. It's not owned by the United States. It's owned by the city. So the city owns the port and they control the ports. There is a level of stack levels, and there's only could be, I believe there's only like 3 stack or 4 or 5 stack. You can't go higher than that. So that's already it's in itself constraint in itself. So can those restraints be increased? That's a city ordinance issue, not a government issue. And also the system's just really bad. Like, hey, it's very old. Hey, your system, can I get an worker come in? Just come in. And also it's unionized too, so only X amount of workers can be there, and they have a lot of power of who can go, who can come in. So they can't put a lot of workforce into it because they can't demand that, as they have to work with the union. So there's also that little gap there. So it's very complex for how to work this logistical issue. It's just that how they can increase technology with the ports itself, and how they can kind of help with logistically everything else, like we all mentioned on this call.
Yeah. And so now last words. So as 2 sentences on the global supply shortage, if you can think of any. And you want to go first?
I am very optimistic about it.
Yeah.
Very optimistic about it. It's all because COVID shut down the economy, where it kind of gave that gap where, hey, can we also have like an automation sense of view of this? And of course, right now we can't, because it's all derived on human beings being able to kind of control these kind of situations. If there's technologies that can definitely enhance without any human interactive responsibilities, this will get solved without, you know, any kind of issues in the future. So be very interesting to see if any kind of logistic company kind of bring up that technology in the future.
Yeah,
Matthew?
I'm also hopeful on this. I'm pretty optimistic just because of this. The lessons it has taught everyone across the board, and the positive case it has made for onshoring a lot of manufacturing and changing the way things are moved across the country. So I'm very short-term pain, long-term benefit, and lessons learned if we can learn and adjust from it. So I'm very optimistic on this.
Yeah, and I guess for me is that, you know, this is how the system works. Once a shock comes in, you know, we either improve or just sit and bear the pain. Anyways, so I think that kind of concludes our weekly podcast. Do you guys have any last words for our listeners?
Subscribe and
Netflix.
follow.
Subscribe to
Huh?
our. Go ahead, Matthews.
Go ahead, B.
Instead of subscribing and paying your time on Netflix, as you see with the drop of their subscriptions, come subscribe to us.
And increase subscription fees to $20.
We are free.
Yeah, we're free.
We are
Just
free.
subscribe
Come
to
to
us.
us.
Yeah.
I can't beat that. So
I-
that's good. I like that. What B said.
Free 99. Can't beat that, y'all.